HOA Karen blocked my ranch gate with her luxury SUV. She didn't know my bulldozer was already running. I thought a person could only cross a property line once. I was wrong. For months, an HOA president used complaints, pressure, and a luxury SUV to make me feel like a stranger on my own ranch. She believed her title gave her control over my land. But she never looked closely at the records, and she never expected my quiet response to become the thing that exposed everything. Stay with me, because this story is about to reveal what happens when facts finally catch up with power. And if you enjoy real stories about land, justice, and standing your ground, consider subscribing and joining us for more. At 5:47 a.m., I found a black Range Rover sitting across my ranch entrance like someone had decided a private gate was just another parking space. The engine was off. The windows were tinted. The driver's side tires rested on the gravel apron that led into Walker Creek Ranch, blocking the only entrance wide enough for my cattle trailer and equipment trucks to pass. For most people, it might have looked like an inconvenience. For me, it was a message. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 55 years old, and I own Walker Creek Ranch, 720 acres of Colorado land that my family has worked for 3 generations. That gate was not a decorative entrance. It was the point where my cattle moved, where deliveries arrived, where my equipment passed through every day. And that morning, one black Range Rover had brought everything to a stop. Behind me, my cattle trailer sat waiting. The horses shifted inside the nearby pen. The diesel engine of my pickup idled quietly while I stared at the vehicle blocking my property. Then the driver's door opened. Rebecca Holloway stepped out. She was the president of Canyon Ridge Estates HOA, the neighborhood built along my western boundary 4 years earlier. She wore a clean white jacket, expensive sunglasses, and the confident expression of someone who had never expected anyone to challenge her. She looked past me toward the ranch. Not at the gate, not at the private property sign, not at the fence line. She looked at my land like it was something that needed correcting. "You're moving cattle this early again?" she asked. I looked at the Range Rover. "You're parked across my entrance." Rebecca glanced back at the vehicle, then back at me. "Your entrance?" I nodded. "Yes. Walker Creek Ranch. Private property." For a second, she looked surprised. Then she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they believe the conversation is already over. "Ethan, this area has changed. Canyon Ridge Estates is a residential community now. People paid good money to live here. They don't want to wake up to tractors, livestock, and heavy equipment." I kept my voice calm. "The ranch was here long before Canyon Ridge." She adjusted her sunglasses. "That doesn't mean you get to ignore the impact you're having on everyone around you." I looked at the vehicle again. "Move your Range Rover, Rebecca." She didn't move. Instead, she stepped closer to the gate. "This road has become a problem. Your operation affects our property values, and the HOA has a responsibility to protect the community." I looked at the gravel beneath her shoes. The same gravel my grandfather had driven across decades before Canyon Ridge Estates existed. "You're standing on my property right now." That was when she laughed. Not loudly, not angrily, just a short laugh from someone who believed the idea itself was ridiculous. "Your property?" She looked toward the neighborhood behind her. "Ethan, you really need to understand how things work now." I waited. "I'm the HOA president." The way she said it made those words sound like a deed, like a title, like ownership. "But you're not the property owner here," I said. Her smile faded slightly. "I decide what's acceptable around this community." "This isn't your community." Rebecca looked at me for a long moment. Then she walked back toward her Range Rover. "I don't have time to argue about this. You blocked my ranch entrance." She opened the driver's door. "No, Ethan. I'm parked near a road that has always been used by this area." I watched her get inside. "That doesn't make it yours." She ignored me. The door closed. The Range Rover remained exactly where it was. Then she rolled down the window.
I understand.
Maybe this would be easier if you considered selling some of that land. It would solve a lot of problems. That sentence stayed with me, because it wasn't about parking. People don't block a ranch gate at sunrise because they are concerned about appearances. They do it because they want something. I'll see you around, Ethan. Then she drove away toward Canyon Ridge Estates, leaving a cloud of dust behind her. I stood there watching the Range Rover disappear beyond the fence line. The cattle were still waiting. The trailer was still stuck. The morning work I had planned was already delayed. But the thing bothering me wasn't the inconvenience. It was the certainty in her voice. Rebecca Holloway didn't sound like someone making a complaint. She sounded like someone giving an order. And that was the moment I understood something important. This was never going to be about one vehicle blocking one gate. This was about a person who believed a title gave her power over land she didn't own. And she had no idea who she was dealing with. To understand why I knew that morning wasn't just about parking, you have to go back 8 months. Rebecca Holloway's first attack didn't come in a Range Rover. It came in an envelope. I found it clipped to my gate one October morning. Canyon Ridge Estates letterhead. My full name. My ranch address. At the top, in bold letters, it said, Notice of Community Impact Violation. According to Rebecca, Walker Creek Ranch was creating excessive agricultural noise, airborne dust, livestock odor, and visual incompatibility with Canyon Ridge Estates. I read that last phrase twice. My cattle had apparently become visually incompatible with Colorado. The letter ordered me to stop operating tractors before 8 o'clock a.m., move livestock at least 300 feet from the western fence, and install screening along nearly a mile of ranch boundary. At the bottom was Rebecca's signature, President Canyon Ridge Estates HOA. I called the HOA office. Rebecca answered. Your rules don't apply to Walker Creek Ranch. They apply to activities affecting our residents. Show me the recorded document giving Canyon Ridge authority over my property. Silence. Then her voice hardened. We're trying to handle this cooperatively, Ethan. Then cooperate with the property line. I photographed the letter and filed it. That habit came from my years as an Army engineer. When something failed, you didn't write down what you felt about it. You recorded dates, measurements, conditions, names. Evidence survives arguments. Rebecca sent another letter 9 days later. Then another. Noise, dust, cattle, equipment lights. A hay trailer supposedly creating a traffic hazard. Every complaint went somewhere different. County planning, agricultural services, environmental health. And every inspector reached essentially the same conclusion. Walker Creek Ranch was a lawful agricultural operation that had existed long before Canyon Ridge Estates. One county inspector stood beside my equipment shed after finishing his inspection and shook his head. There's nothing here, Ethan. I know. Then why does she keep calling? That was the question. Rebecca wasn't gathering evidence. She was creating paperwork. By December, she changed tactics. Canyon Ridge residents began receiving emails warning that agricultural activity next door could reduce property values. Photos of my cattle appeared on neighborhood social media pages beside phrases like community health concerns and uncontrolled commercial operations. One photograph showed dust behind my tractor during hay cutting. Rebecca captioned it, AIR quality impact near family homes. I saved the post. Then I saved the comments underneath it. Some residents defended me. Others had never met me but were suddenly discussing my ranch like it was an industrial site. That was when the pressure became dangerous. Not because Rebecca had proven anything, because she was teaching people to fear something before asking whether it was true. Then came the water accusation. Rebecca claimed runoff from my cattle pastures might be contaminating neighborhood wells. The county tested the relevant water sources. No agricultural contamination. Rebecca demanded another inspection. Same result. She didn't apologize. She simply moved to the next accusation. By January, I had a file box on the kitchen table filled with her letters, inspection reports, photographs, screenshots, and certified mail receipts. Sarah used to sit at that table. 3 years after losing her, I still caught myself looking toward the empty chair when I had a difficult decision to make. She'd been better with people than I was, but she had one rule about bullies: never argue about what you can prove. So I kept proving, and Rebecca kept escalating. The next envelope arrived by certified mail. This one was different. Final agricultural compliance notice. Rebecca claimed Canyon Ridge Estates had authority under a Western Residential Compatibility Ordinance to demand immediate restrictions on my ranch operation. The letter gave me 10 days. After that, it threatened legal action, daily penalties, and referral to county enforcement. I almost laughed. Then I saw the citation. Ordinance 18447C. Something about it looked wrong. I had spent enough years reading permits, engineering specifications, and county requirements to recognize how legal references were structured. So I searched my records. Nothing. I checked the county code database. Nothing. Then I called the county clerk. "Can you confirm an ordinance number for me?" I read it aloud. I heard keyboard clicks. Then the clerk said, "Mr. Walker, we don't have an ordinance under that number." Could it be old? Not in this county. I looked down at Rebecca's letter. Official letterhead, formal language, 10-day deadline, threatened penalties, and a law that didn't exist. Thank you. I hung up and didn't call Rebecca. That mattered, because anger would have told her what I'd discovered. Instead, I printed the county search results, attached them to her letter, wrote the date across the top, and placed both documents in my growing file. Then, I started a second folder. On the tab I wrote 2 words: Rebecca Holloway. The complaints had failed. The inspections had failed. The water accusation had failed. Now she was citing imaginary authority to make a third-generation ranch owner believe he could be punished for working his own land. That wasn't confusion anymore. It was a pattern. And once I saw the pattern, I stopped asking whether Rebecca Holloway understood where her authority ended. I started asking why she needed me to believe it didn't. I got my first answer a few weeks later when the letters stopped arriving and her Range Rover started appearing at my gate. The first time, I thought it was another complaint. The second time, I knew it wasn't. Rebecca Holloway had changed tactics. She stopped sending paper. She started using pressure. It began on a Tuesday morning during cattle transport. I had a buyer scheduled to pick up 12 head from the south pasture. The truck was due at 7:30, the same route I had used for years. At 7:15, I saw the black Range Rover parked across the entrance. Same place, same angle, same message. I walked up to the driver's window. Rebecca was sitting inside, drinking coffee. She lowered the window. "Morning, Ethan." I looked at the gate. "Move your vehicle." She took a sip. "I'm not blocking anything. There's a cattle truck arriving in 15 minutes. Then they can use another entrance." I looked at her. "There isn't another entrance that works for that trailer." She shrugged. "That's a ranch management issue." That was the first time I understood what she was doing. She wasn't trying to convince me I was wrong. She was trying to make my life difficult enough that I would eventually stop resisting. I called Daniel Brooks at the county sheriff's office. Daniel had been sheriff for years. He knew my ranch. He knew the property lines. He had responded to enough neighborhood disputes to understand that not every argument was actually about the thing people claimed it was about. When he arrived, he stepped out of his cruiser and walked toward the Range Rover. Rebecca got out before he reached the window. "Sheriff Brooks, I'm glad you're here. This property owner is causing problems for our community." Daniel looked at her. Then he looked at the gate. "What exactly is happening?" "He is claiming this road belongs to him." I answered before Daniel could. "Because it does." Daniel looked between us. "Do you have a property dispute or a parking issue?" Rebecca smiled. "It's a community access issue." Daniel looked at me. I pointed to the fence line. "My deed covers this entrance. The road behind that fence has been my access point for decades." Daniel nodded. Then he looked back at Rebecca. Do you have documentation showing HOA ownership? Rebecca hesitated, only for a second. But I saw it. No, but the area has always been used by residents. Daniel gave a small nod. Use doesn't automatically determine ownership. That was the first time I saw Rebecca lose control of the conversation. She wasn't used to someone ignoring the title of HOA president. She wasn't used to someone asking for proof. The cattle truck eventually arrived after waiting nearly an hour. The buyer left frustrated. I lost the pickup window, another delay, another entry in my file. Date, time, duration, financial impact. I kept documenting. Rebecca kept returning. Over the next 2 months, her Range Rover appeared at the gate during the moments when timing mattered most. When my hay contractor was scheduled, when equipment needed to move, when a feed delivery was expected. She never stayed forever. She didn't need to. She only needed to stay long enough to create damage. One afternoon, my ranch hand called me from the north pasture. Ethan, the feed truck is sitting outside. I looked toward the gate. The Range Rover was there again. I drove down and found Rebecca standing beside it, holding a clipboard. Always the clipboard. It had become part of the uniform. You know, she said, if you worked with us instead of against us, none of this would be necessary. I looked at the clipboard. What are you writing down? Community concerns. About my private property? About the impact your property has on ours. I took a photograph of the Range Rover, the gate, and the time on my phone. Rebecca noticed. Are you documenting me? Yes. Her expression changed. Why? Because you keep creating situations and pretending they don't happen. For the first time, she looked uncomfortable. Only briefly. Then the smile returned. Be careful, Ethan. Sometimes people who fight progress end up losing more than they expect. She got back into her vehicle and drove away. That sentence bothered me more than the parking, because it sounded less like a warning and more like a prediction. A few days later, I met with my neighbor, Tom Harris. Tom owned the ranch east of mine and had watched the area change for decades. He knew every fence line, every creek crossing, and every family that had owned land nearby. We were standing beside his old wooden fence when he asked, You still having problems with that HOA woman? I nodded. Tom looked toward Canyon Ridge Estates. She asked about your land. I turned. What do you mean? She came by 2 months ago, asked whether you'd ever considered selling the western portion of the ranch. I felt something shift. She asked you that? Not directly. She was asking about development possibilities, access, future expansion. Did she mention my name? Tom nodded. She said Walker Creek Ranch was the last piece they needed. The wind moved through the dry grass between us. For months, Rebecca had talked about dust, noise, community standards, property values. But Tom's words changed the entire picture. She wasn't trying to protect Canyon Ridge Estates. She was looking at my land. I went home that evening and opened the file box on my kitchen table. Rebecca Holloway. 8 months of letters. 8 months of complaints. 8 months of pressure. Then I added a new page. Possible development motive. Because suddenly, the question wasn't, why does Rebecca hate my ranch? The question was, what does Rebecca need from my ranch? And if she needed something badly enough to spend 8 months trying to wear me down, I knew one thing. She wasn't going to stop. She was going to escalate. And before she made her next move, I needed to understand exactly where my land ended and where hers began. For years, I had trusted the fence lines, the old markers, and the records my family kept in a metal cabinet in the ranch office. But after 8 months of Rebecca Holloway telling me what I could and couldn't do on my own property, I realized something. I knew my land. I knew the cattle paths. I knew the creek beds. I knew every road, gate, and pasture, But knowing the land wasn't the same as proving it, and proof was what mattered now. I called Michael Carter. Michael had been a licensed surveyor in Colorado for more than 35 years. He had worked on ranch boundaries, county roads, water rights, and property disputes across the region. When I explained the situation, he didn't ask about Rebecca's personality. He didn't ask whether I liked the HOA. He asked one question. "Do you have your original deed?" I told him I did. "Bring it to me." 3 days later, Michael arrived at Walker Creek Ranch with a GPS unit, county maps, and a stack of records that looked older than some of the houses in Canyon Ridge Estates. We started at the entrance gate, the same gate where Rebecca had parked her Range Rover, the same gravel apron where she claimed she had the right to stop my operations. Michael walked the boundary slowly. He checked measurements, compared coordinates, reviewed old survey markers. For 2 days, he barely said anything. That was how I knew he was taking it seriously. Surveyors don't guess. They measure. On the third morning, he called me. "Ethan, I found something." I drove out to meet him near the northern edge of the property. His truck was parked beside the fence, and several documents were spread across the hood. Michael pointed at an old county map. "This is your 1954 recorded agreement." I looked closer. The paper was faded, but the information was clear. "Access and drainage agreement," I read. Michael nodded. "It was recorded with the original Walker Creek Ranch deed." "What does it do?" He traced a line with his finger. "It establishes a protected access and drainage corridor connected to your property." I followed the line across the map. Then I stopped. The corridor crossed directly toward the area where Canyon Ridge Estates had built its entrance road. The decorative stone columns, the private community sign, the road every resident used to enter and leave. All of it. Michael looked at me. "Do you know what this means?" I already knew, but I wanted him to say it. The road they built wasn't completely on their property. He nodded. "Correct." For a moment, neither of us spoke. For 8 months, Rebecca Holloway had stood at my gate telling me where I belonged. She had sent letters. She had organized complaints. She had convinced neighbors that my ranch was the problem. But now the records showed something she apparently never checked. The entrance to her neighborhood depended on a legal interest connected to my land. Michael looked back at the documents. "There's something else." He pulled out the Canyon Ridge development plat. The developer acknowledged this corridor during the original planning process. I looked at the bottom of the page. There was a small note, almost hidden, a reference to the recorded agreement. How did they miss this? Michael gave me a serious look. I don't think they missed it. That sentence changed everything, because there was a difference between not knowing and choosing not to know. I called Rachel Morgan that afternoon. She met me at my ranch office the next morning. Rachel was the kind of attorney who didn't waste words. She looked through the documents, the maps, and Rebecca's violation letters without interrupting. Then she picked up the 1954 agreement again. "This is significant." "How significant?" She looked at me. "Significant enough that the HOA may have built part of its authority on something that was never theirs." She reviewed Rebecca's letters, the complaints, the demands, the claimed restrictions. Then she looked back at the access agreement. "The interesting part is that Rebecca has been acting like she controls your property." She tapped the document. "But if this is correct, her own community may be relying on your recorded rights." That was the first moment in months where I felt the balance shift. Not because I wanted revenge, because I finally had something stronger than an argument. I had records. Rachel wasn't finished. She asked for every document connected to Canyon Ridge Estates. Development plans, construction agreements, county approvals, HOA formation paperwork, anything connected to Greg Sutton, the developer. We spent the next week building a timeline, and then Rachel found something. A county file from the original Canyon Ridge approval process. The name on the folder was Greg Sutton, Inside were early development documents, including notes about future expansion plans. Rachel read through them carefully. Then she looked up. "Ethan, I think we need to understand exactly what Rebecca and Greg were planning." "What do you mean?" She placed one page on the table. "A preliminary expansion map. The future development area extended toward my western boundary, toward the access corridor, toward my land." Suddenly, Tom Harris's warning made sense. Rebecca wasn't trying to push me away because she disliked my ranch. She was trying to remove an obstacle, and my ranch was the obstacle. Rachel closed the folder. "We need to be careful now." "Why?" "Because once people realize a plan is worth millions of dollars, they stop acting like neighbors." I looked out the office window toward the gate. The same gate where Rebecca had parked. The same gate where she thought she had all the power. But she didn't know what Michael had found. She didn't know Rachel was involved. She didn't know her own records were beginning to tell a different story. And she definitely didn't know that the next time she came to my ranch, I wasn't going to argue. I was going to listen. Because when someone believes they are winning, they usually reveal more than they should. After Michael Carter and Rachel Morgan uncovered the 1954 Access and Drainage Agreement, I expected Rebecca Holloway to make another aggressive move. Instead, she went quiet. That was when I knew she was confident. People like Rebecca didn't stop because they were uncertain. They stopped because they believed the outcome was already decided. And I wanted her to keep believing that. For the first time in 8 months, I stopped responding to every complaint. When another HOA email arrived, I forwarded it to Rachel. When another resident posted accusations online, I saved a screenshot. When Rebecca drove slowly past my western fence line, I didn't walk over to confront her. I simply documented the time, location, and activity. The difference was simple. Before, I was reacting. Now, I was building. Rachel helped me organize everything: the original Walker Creek Ranch deed, the 1954 Access and Drainage Agreement, Michael's survey findings, Rebecca's violation notices, county inspection reports, the social media posts, the HOA communications. Every piece created a timeline, and every piece told the same story. Rebecca Holloway had spent months trying to create authority that did not exist, but we still needed to understand how far it went. Because the access agreement explained the road, it didn't explain why Rebecca was willing to risk so much to control it. That answer came from the HOA records. Rachel requested copies of Canyon Ridge Estates meeting minutes, financial reports, and development documents. At first, the HOA refused. They claimed the requests were unnecessary and that the documents contained private community information. Rachel sent a formal demand. Within 48 hours, some documents appeared. Not all, but enough. There were references to something called the Canyon Ridge Expansion Initiative, Phase 2, a future development project, additional homes, new infrastructure, a larger entrance corridor. Rachel spread the papers across my kitchen table. This is what Rebecca was protecting. I looked at the maps. The proposed expansion area reached toward the western side of Walker Creek Ranch, toward the same corridor Michael had found. The access road. Rachel nodded. Exactly. The pieces were starting to connect. Rebecca wasn't upset about my cattle. She wasn't worried about dust. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood from my ranch. She needed control of the access corridor because the future expansion depended on it. That changed the entire fight. For months, Rebecca had made herself look like a concerned homeowner defending property values. But behind the complaints was a development plan, a business decision, and my ranch was standing in the way. A few days later, I received another letter from Rebecca. This one was different. It wasn't about noise, it wasn't about cattle, it wasn't about dust. It was an invitation, a meeting request. Rebecca wanted to discuss a mutually beneficial solution. Rachel read the letter and smiled slightly. She knows something changed. I looked at her. What makes you say that? Because people who believe they have all the power don't suddenly ask for cooperation. The meeting was held at a coffee shop near Canyon Ridge Estates. Rebecca arrived 15 minutes late. She brought no clipboard this time, no violation notices, no threats, just a folder that told me everything. She sat across from me. "Ethan, I think we can resolve this situation." I listened. We all want the same thing: a successful community, stable property values, good relationships. I said nothing. She opened the folder. "We would be interested in purchasing a portion of your western acreage." There it was, the real conversation. Not dust, not cattle, not community standards. Land. "How much?" She gave a number. It was high, enough to make many people hesitate, but not enough to make sense, because she wasn't just buying land, she was buying control. "I'll think about it." Rebecca leaned back. "I hope you do, because if we can't find a private solution, this could become complicated." The words were polite. The meaning wasn't. I looked at her. "Is that a threat?" "No," she smiled. "It's advice." I left the meeting knowing exactly what had happened. Rebecca had finally admitted what she wanted. She wanted my land. But she had made one mistake. She thought I was still trying to defend myself. I wasn't. I was preparing the case. That night, Rachel called me. "Ethan, we need to talk." Her voice was different, more serious. "What happened?" "I found something in the HOA financial records." "What?" "A payment." "From who?" "Greg Sutton, the developer behind Canyon Ridge Estates." I sat down. "What kind of payment?" "A consulting payment made shortly before Rebecca became HOA president." I looked toward the ranch gate through the window, the same gate where this all started. Rachel continued. "And Ethan, there's more." "What?" "The payment description mentions access planning." The room went quiet. For 8 months, Rebecca had tried to convince me I was the problem. But now we had something different. A connection, a reason, a possible explanation for everything she had done. Then my phone rang. It was Linda Parker, the HOA treasurer. I answered. Her voice was low. "Ethan, I need to meet with you." "About what?" A pause. Then she said, "About what Rebecca and Greg don't want anyone to know." And for the first time since this started, I realized something important. Rebecca Holloway wasn't just fighting to win. She was fighting to keep something hidden. Linda Parker knew that better than anyone. For 5 years, Linda had served as treasurer of Canyon Ridge Estates. She handled budgets, reviewed invoices, and watched every dollar that moved through the HOA accounts. At first, she believed Rebecca was doing what every HOA president claimed to do: protect the community, maintain property values, keep things organized. But over time, Linda started noticing something. The numbers didn't match the explanations. Projects were approved before homeowners knew about them. Consulting fees appeared without clear descriptions. Meetings were rushed when certain topics came up. And every conversation about the Western Access Corridor ended the same way. "We'll address that later." Later never came. Until Ethan Walker started asking questions. Linda met me before sunrise at a small diner outside town. She chose the time. She chose the location. That told me she was nervous. When she sat down, she placed a folder on the table. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I don't want to hurt the homeowners." "I don't either." She looked down at the folder. "But I think Rebecca and Greg Sutton have been using everyone." Inside were copies of HOA meeting minutes, financial records, emails, and development documents. Rachel Morgan reviewed everything with me that afternoon. The first thing she noticed was the timeline. Greg Sutton had created Canyon Ridge Estates with one problem. The development had limited access for future expansion. The Western Corridor connected to Walker Creek Ranch. The same corridor identified in the 1954 agreement. Rachel pointed at the documents. They knew about this. Linda nodded. Rebecca knew before she became president. The room went quiet. How? Linda opened another file. An internal HOA transition document. A note from Greg Sutton's development company. The subject line read, Future Access Coordination. The message discussed preserving options for additional development near the western boundary. Rachel read carefully. Options. She looked at me. That's the word developers use when they don't own something yet, but want to control the possibility. Linda continued. Rebecca was elected 6 months after this discussion started. And after that, everything became about pressure. The complaints, the letters, the social media posts, the gate incidents. Rachel organized the documents across the table. This changes the entire case. Before, Rebecca looked like an HOA president who overstepped. Now she looked like someone using HOA authority to solve a private development problem. That difference mattered, because mistakes could be corrected, but intentional actions created consequences. Then Linda handed Rachel one more document, a Phase 2 expansion map. The proposed development included additional homes, a larger entrance route, and new infrastructure. The access corridor ran directly through the area connected to Ethan's property rights. Rachel looked at me. Your ranch isn't an inconvenience. It's the missing piece. For months, Rebecca had told Canyon Ridge residents that Ethan was the obstacle. The ranch owner who refused to cooperate. The neighbor who wouldn't compromise. But the truth was different. Ethan wasn't blocking their future. They were trying to build their future through him. The next morning, Rachel prepared a formal evidence package. It included the original Walker Creek Ranch deed, the 1954 recorded agreement, Michael Carter's survey, HOA communications, financial records, developer documents, Linda's testimony, everything connected. Then Rebecca made her next move. She filed an emergency lawsuit. The claim was predictable. She accused me of interfering with community operations. She claimed my actions threatened neighborhood access and property values. She asked the court to restrict my use of my own land. When Rachel read the filing, she didn't look worried. She looked almost disappointed. She had one chance to stop. What do you mean? Once she knew we had the records, she could have negotiated. Rachel closed the folder. Instead, she chose a courtroom. The lawsuit changed the entire situation. Rebecca wanted a public fight. Now she was going to get one. But this time, she wasn't controlling the story. She couldn't rely on HOA letters. She couldn't rely on rumors. She couldn't rely on homeowners who only knew her version. Now everything would be measured against documents. Deeds, surveys, records, facts. The same things she had ignored for months. That evening, I walked out to the ranch gate. The same place where her Range Rover had blocked my entrance. The same place where she first told me she decided what belonged around there. I looked at the fence line. The land hadn't changed. The boundary hadn't moved. Only the truth had finally caught up. And Rebecca Holloway was about to learn the difference between having influence and having rights. Because inside a courtroom, a title on a business card means nothing. Only ownership does. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. Rebecca Holloway arrived early. That was the first thing I noticed. She had always been someone who controlled the room before she entered it. The carefully chosen clothes, the confident posture, the way she spoke as if every conversation had already been decided. But the courthouse was different. Nobody there cared that she was HOA president. Nobody there cared how many homeowners attended her meetings. Nobody there cared about the letters she had sent or the image she had created. The only thing that mattered was evidence. And for the first time, Rebecca had to answer questions she couldn't control. She sat beside her attorney, Bradley Foster. the same attorney who had helped prepare her previous HOA notices. He carried the confidence of someone who expected the judge to see things his client's way. Rachel Morgan sat across from them with 3 binders in front of her. Not 1, 3. Each one organized. Each one labeled. Each one backed by records. Rebecca looked at those binders several times before the hearing began. I noticed. She knew what they represented. Months of documents, months of facts, months of things she couldn't explain away. The judge entered the courtroom. Judge Robert Mitchell reviewed the case file before looking up. Mr. Walker, he said, the court understands this dispute involves access, property rights, and alleged interference with community operations. Rachel stood. Your Honor, that is correct, but the central issue is ownership. Rebecca's attorney stood next. Your Honor, my client represents hundreds of homeowners whose property values are being affected by Mr. Walker's actions. Rachel didn't react. She simply waited. The first document she presented was the original deed for Walker Creek Ranch, then the 1954 Access and Drainage Agreement, then Michael Carter's survey. Each document created another piece of the same picture. Rachel explained that the agreement had been recorded decades before Canyon Ridge Estates existed. She explained that the access corridor had been acknowledged during the original development process. She explained that the HOA had built infrastructure connected to a recorded property interest without obtaining the required permission. Rebecca's attorney objected. We believe this interpretation is exaggerated. Judge Mitchell looked at him. Do you have a different interpretation of the recorded document? A pause. We believe historical usage should be considered. The judge looked down at the document again. Usage does not replace ownership. The room became quiet. Rebecca shifted in her seat. Rachel continued. Then came the HOA documents, meeting minutes, development discussions, expansion plans, financial records, the documents Linda Parker provided. Rachel placed one page on the table. This document shows Canyon Ridge Estates was planning a future expansion that depended on access connected to Mr. Walker's property. Rebecca's attorney immediately objected. Those are preliminary planning documents. Rachel nodded. Exactly. She looked at the judge. Which means the HOA was making decisions about access before securing legal rights to that access. Judge Mitchell looked toward Rebecca. Ms. Holloway, did Canyon Ridge Estates have a recorded agreement with Mr. Walker before using this corridor? Rebecca leaned forward. Her attorney started to answer. The judge stopped him. I asked Ms. Holloway. For the first time, Rebecca didn't have a prepared response. She looked at her attorney, then back at the judge. We believed we had the right to use it. Judge Mitchell's expression remained unchanged. Belief is not the same as legal authority. That sentence landed harder than any argument. Because it was the entire case. For months, Rebecca had operated on belief. She believed the HOA had authority. She believed complaints created power. She believed enough homeowners agreeing with her could change reality. But property records didn't work that way. Rachel then introduced the final piece, a timeline. Rebecca's complaints against my ranch began shortly after internal HOA discussions about expansion access, the parking incidents, the violation letters, the pressure campaign. Everything happened after the development plan needed control of the corridor. The judge reviewed the timeline carefully. Then he looked at Rebecca. Ms. Holloway, the court is concerned that actions presented as community protection may have been connected to a private development objective. Rebecca's expression changed. Not anger, not confidence, concern, because the court was no longer discussing whether she had been too aggressive. It was questioning why she had been aggressive in the first place. After several hours, Judge Mitchell issued his decision. He denied the HOA's emergency request against me. He ordered a complete review of the property records and access agreements, and he instructed both sides to return with a legal resolution based on the actual ownership documents. Not assumptions, not HOA opinions, not community pressure. Documents. Outside the courtroom, Rebecca walked past without saying anything. That was unusual. For months, she had always needed the final word. At my gate, in letters, at meetings. But now she had nothing to say. Rachel closed her folder. She thought this was about convincing people. I looked back at the courthouse doors. What is it about? Rachel answered, proving things. That was the difference. Rebecca had spent 8 months creating a story. We had spent those same 8 months collecting the truth. But the fight wasn't over yet, because the court had only exposed the foundation. Now everyone was going to see what had been built on top of it. After the hearing, Rebecca Holloway became quieter. Not calmer, not reasonable, just quieter. The kind of silence people use when they are trying to figure out their next move. But I already knew what her next move would be. People like Rebecca didn't walk away when the facts changed. They doubled down. A week after the court hearing, I received the final approval for my drainage project. The permit was straightforward. The county had reviewed the plans. The Natural Resources Conservation Service had reviewed the water management improvements. The work was designed to control seasonal runoff, protect the lower pasture, and provide a more reliable water source for my cattle. It was legal. It was necessary. And it was entirely on my property, the same property Rebecca had spent months trying to control. The equipment arrived before sunrise. My Caterpillar D6 sat near the eastern field, covered in dust from years of work. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a threat. It was a machine, a tool. The same kind of equipment I had operated for years as an Army Corps of Engineers specialist. You don't move earth by arguing with it. You study the ground. You understand the measurements. Then you make the right cut. That morning, I started the drainage work at 5:30 a.m. The plan was simple. A channel along the low section of the property. Improved water flow, less erosion, better pasture conditions. Every measurement matched the approved plans. At 6:15, I saw headlights coming down the ranch road. I already knew who it was. Rebecca's black Range Rover rolled toward the gate. She stopped exactly where she always stopped, across my entrance. The difference was that this time she wasn't surprising me. She was arriving in the middle of a permitted construction area. She stepped out holding her phone. No clipboard today, no violation notice, just a camera. Ethan. I shut off the equipment controls and looked over. Rebecca. She looked at the drainage work, then at the permit sign attached near the equipment area. You actually went through with this. I looked at the paper in her hand. You knew I was planning this. This is retaliation. No. I pointed toward the documents. This is approved agricultural drainage work. She stepped closer. You know what this will do to the community. I almost smiled, because after everything, she was still using the same argument. Community, impact, values, anything except ownership. This is my land, Rebecca. She looked toward the gate, then toward the neighborhood behind her. This affects Canyon Ridge. What affects Canyon Ridge is building a neighborhood without understanding the property around it. Her expression tightened. For a moment, the confidence disappeared. Then it came back. I'll be contacting the county. You already did, she paused, because she knew I was right. The court records showed the pattern. The county knew the dispute. The permits had been reviewed. There was nothing left to threaten. So she did what she had done from the beginning. She created a scene. She got back into the Range Rover. Then she parked it. Right in the work area. I watched her close the door. She rolled down the window. Let's see if you continue when my vehicle is here. I looked at the Range Rover, then at the drainage plan, then back at her. She expected anger. She expected an argument. She expected me to make a mistake. But she had never understood the difference between patience and weakness. I started the D6 again, not toward her vehicle, around it. The drainage line followed the approved measurements. The blade moved soil exactly where the plan required. One pass, then another. Rebecca watched from inside the Range Rover. At first, she looked confident, then confused, because she realized something. I wasn't trying to move her car. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was simply continuing work on my own property. By mid-morning, the landscape had changed. The drainage channel surrounded the area where she had parked. The Range Rover remained untouched. Not scratched, not damaged, just separated. A black luxury vehicle sitting on a raised section of ground surrounded by the very land Rebecca had claimed belonged to her community. I parked the D6 and shut it down. The silence after the engine stopped was almost strange. Rebecca stepped out. She walked toward the edge of the channel. Then she stopped. The confidence was gone. This isn't what I expected. I stood near the equipment. What did you expect? She looked at the channel. I expected you to react. That was the truth. She had built the entire conflict around provoking a reaction. A mistake, a threat, an angry decision. Anything she could use against me. But I had given her nothing. Only permits, only records, only facts. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling Sheriff Brooks. That's your choice. 17 minutes later, Daniel Brooks arrived. He stepped out of his cruiser, looked at the drainage work, then looked at the Range Rover sitting on the raised section. He didn't speak immediately. He walked around the area, checked the permit, reviewed the documents I handed him. Then he looked at Rebecca. Ms. Holloway, what exactly is the issue? She pointed toward the vehicle. He trapped my car. Daniel looked at the Range Rover, then at me. Did you move her vehicle? No. Did you damage it? No. Did you begin work after she arrived? No. Equipment was operating before she parked. Daniel looked back at Rebecca. The answer was already clear. But he asked one more question. Why was your vehicle inside an active permitted work area? Rebecca didn't answer. Because for the first time, she didn't have a document. She didn't have a complaint. She didn't have a rule. She only had the same problem she had created 8 months earlier. She had placed herself where she didn't belong. Daniel looked at me. Mr. Walker, keep your permit and records available. Then he looked at Rebecca. And you should probably arrange recovery of your vehicle through the appropriate means. Her face changed. Not because she lost a fight. Because she finally realized she was no longer controlling the situation. As the tow company arrived later that afternoon, I watched the Range Rover lifted away. The vehicle was fine. The paint was untouched. But something else had changed. Rebecca Holloway had spent months trying to make me feel powerless on my own land. Now she was standing on that same land, watching someone else remove the symbol she thought gave her authority. And she still didn't know the biggest problem was not where her vehicle was parked. It was what the records were about to reveal about the road behind her. The Range Rover incident spread through Canyon Ridge Estates faster than any complaint Rebecca Holloway had ever written. But this time, the story was different. There was no accusation, no edited photograph, no warning letter. People had seen what happened. They saw Rebecca demand action. They saw Sheriff Daniel Brooks review the documents. They saw that Ethan Walker's work continued because it was legal. And they saw something they had never seen before. Rebecca didn't have control. The next morning, Rachel Morgan called me. Ethan, we need to move quickly. Why? Because the HOA board is trying to control the narrative before the homeowners see the complete records. I already knew what that meant. For months, Rebecca had relied on people only hearing one side. Now the documents were starting to speak. Rachel prepared the final notice. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't aggressive. It was simple facts. The Walker Creek Ranch deed, the 1954 Access and Drainage Agreement, Michael Carter's survey, the development records, the unauthorized use of the access corridor. The notice stated that Canyon Ridge Estates had to negotiate a legal access agreement or face further legal action regarding their use of the recorded property interest. When Rebecca received it, she called immediately. Not her attorney. Me. That told me everything. Shh. Ethan, this is unnecessary. I looked at the letter in front of me. Is that what you call using my property without permission? You know this isn't that simple. It actually is. She became quiet. Then her tone changed. You don't understand what you're risking. I looked out toward the ranch gate, the same gate where this started. No, Rebecca. I understand exactly what I'm protecting. You could damage hundreds of homeowners. I paused, because that sentence was important. Not because it was true, because it revealed what she had been doing from the beginning. She was making homeowners responsible for decisions they didn't make. Those homeowners deserved the truth. She didn't answer. A few seconds later, the call ended. 3 days after the notice was sent, Rachel received a response from the HOA attorney. They requested negotiations. The same people who had spent months claiming authority suddenly wanted an agreement. That was the moment the power shifted completely. Not when the Range Rover was towed. Not when Rebecca lost the courtroom hearing. This was the moment they admitted the truth. They needed something from me. The negotiations began with attorneys, survey maps, and property documents spread across a conference table. Rebecca attended. So did Greg Sutton. I had never met Greg before. He was exactly what I expected. Professional, polished, calm. The kind of person who believed every problem had a price. Ethan, Greg said, we want to resolve this reasonably. I looked at him. You built a neighborhood using access connected to my property. He leaned back. We relied on previous planning documents. Planning documents aren't ownership documents. Rachel placed Michael Carter's survey on the table. The issue is not whether the development was planned. The issue is whether the necessary rights existed. Greg looked uncomfortable for the first time, because the answer was clear. They didn't. Then Rachel presented another document, an internal developer email. One sentence was highlighted. Future expansion depends on securing western access. The room became quiet. Greg looked at Rebecca. Rebecca looked away. That sentence explained everything. The HOA wasn't reacting to my ranch. They were trying to solve a development problem. The complaints, the pressure, the parking, the public accusations. All of it had one purpose: force me to give up control. Michael Carter joined the meeting by phone and explained the survey findings. The recorded corridor existed before Canyon Ridge Estates, and the current road partially overlaps that corridor. Can it continue? Only through a proper agreement with the property owner. That was the first time anyone said it out loud. The road everyone thought belonged to Canyon Ridge Estates depended on Ethan Walker. The rancher Rebecca had treated like an obstacle, the person she had tried to pressure, the person she had tried to make smaller. Now they needed his signature. The settlement process lasted several weeks. Canyon Ridge Estates agreed to compensate Walker Creek Ranch for years of unauthorized use. They also agreed to a permanent access agreement with clear terms. No expansion, no additional use, no future changes without approval. The road remained, the neighborhood remained, but the illusion of ownership disappeared. Then came the HOA meeting. The homeowners gathered expecting an update. Instead, they received the records, the original agreements, the development documents, the financial information. Linda Parker stood before them. She didn't defend Rebecca, she explained what happened. Many residents were angry, not at Ethan, at the people who had made decisions without telling them. Rebecca sat quietly. For once, she wasn't directing the conversation. She wasn't holding a clipboard. She wasn't telling people what to think. She was listening. The next week, the HOA board scheduled a special election. The reason was simple. Trust was gone. And without trust, leadership disappears. Rebecca Holloway had spent months trying to convince everyone that Ethan Walker was the problem. But the documents showed something else. The real problem was that people had believed a story without checking the records, and now everyone knew the truth. The road was still there. The houses were still there. The neighborhood was still there. But the power had changed hands. Not because Ethan took anything from them, because the law gave back what was always his. The final court order came 6 weeks after the negotiations began. By then, Canyon Ridge Estates was no longer arguing about whether the access corridor existed. Everyone knew it did. The question was, what happened next? Judge Robert Mitchell reviewed the final agreements, the property records, and the findings from the previous hearing. The decision was clear. Walker Creek Ranch retained ownership rights connected to the recorded 1954 access and drainage agreement. Canyon Ridge Estates could continue using the existing road only under a properly negotiated legal agreement with Ethan Walker. The HOA was required to compensate Ethan for years of unauthorized use, and any future expansion plans involving the corridor required written approval from the property owner. The same person Rebecca Holloway had spent months trying to control. Me. But the money was never the part that mattered most. It was the acknowledgement. A piece of paper from a judge confirming something my family had known for generations. The land was ours. Not because we had the loudest voice. Not because we had more influence. Because the records said so. After the ruling, Rebecca lost the position she had built her identity around. The HOA special election was held on a Thursday evening. Linda Parker spoke first. She didn't attack Rebecca. She didn't need to. She simply presented the facts, the missing documents, the hidden development discussions, the decisions made without homeowners knowing the full situation. When the vote was counted, Rebecca Holloway was no longer president of Canyon Ridge Estates. The woman who once believed an HOA title could control a ranch had lost the one title she cared about most. Greg Sutton faced his own problems afterward. The county opened a review into the original development process and whether buyers had been given complete information about the access issues connected to the expansion plans. The same records Rebecca and Greg had hoped would stay buried were now the records everyone wanted to see. The truth had not changed. Only the number of people paying attention had. A few months later, Walker Creek Ranch was quiet again. Not the silence of a fight ending, the silence of a place returning to normal. The drainage project was finished. The new channel worked exactly as planned. Spring runoff moved safely through the property, protecting the lower pasture and improving the water supply for my cattle. The gate was rebuilt too. A new steel frame replaced the old entrance. Not bigger, not more impressive, just stronger. A sign hung beside it. Private property, respect the boundary. Simple words. But after everything that happened, they meant more than they appeared to. One afternoon, Daniel Brooks stopped by the ranch. He stood near the gate and looked toward the western road. Looks different. I nodded. It does. He smiled. You know, most people think these disputes are about fences. I looked at the property stretching beyond the gate. They're not. Daniel waited. They're about whether people believe rules apply to them. He nodded. And whether people know how to protect themselves when someone forgets. That was the lesson. Rebecca Holloway wasn't defeated because I had a bulldozer. She wasn't defeated because I argued louder. She wasn't defeated because I wanted revenge. She was defeated because she believed confidence could replace evidence. She believed a position could replace ownership. She believed enough people repeating something could make it true. But land doesn't work that way. A boundary isn't a suggestion. A deed isn't an opinion. And ownership doesn't disappear because someone builds a neighborhood next to it. That evening, I sat on the porch overlooking Walker Creek Ranch. The same land my grandfather had worked. The same land my father had protected. The same land Rebecca once looked at like an opportunity waiting for someone else to claim. The cattle moved slowly across the pasture. The creek ran through the drainage channel. The fence line stood exactly where it belonged. For the first time in a long time, there was no paperwork waiting, no complaint letter, No unexpected vehicle at the gate. No accusation from someone who thought they understood my land better than I did. Just the ranch. Just the quiet. Just home. And sometimes people ask me if I regret how everything happened. If I wish I had handled Rebecca differently. My answer is always the same. I wish she had never decided she owned something that wasn't hers. I wish she had looked at a neighboring ranch and seen a neighbor instead of an obstacle. I wish she had understood that cooperation is built on respect, not pressure. But once someone crosses that line, the answer isn't anger. The answer is preparation. Get the records, know the boundaries, understand the law. Because the strongest response to someone trying to take control of your property is not losing control yourself. It's standing still, knowing exactly where you stand, and letting the truth do the work. Rebecca Holloway thought she was fighting a rancher. What she was really fighting was a deed. And a deed doesn't care about titles, appearances, or popularity. It only cares about what is true. The land stayed. The power disappeared. And Walker Creek Ranch remained exactly what it had always been. Mine.
The lesson Ethan learned was simple. When someone challenges what belongs to you, patience and reparation matter more than anger. Ethan did not protect his ranch by shouting louder or reacting more conflict. He protected it by keeping records, checking the facts, understanding the documents, and allowing the truth of the property record to speak for itself. Land, home, and communities all depends on respect. A boundary is not just a line on a map. It represents trust between neighbors and generations of people who work to build something lasting. Ethan's story reminds us that staying your ground does not mean reacting division. Sometimes it means staying calm, knowing your right, and treating the two with care. If you have ever dealt with a property dispute, an HOA issues, or a situation where you felt unheard, share your experience below. Write a yes if you believe every property owner deserves to have their right respected. And if story about land, perseverance, and ordinary people protecting what's matters to them speak to you, consider subscribing. Stay with us for more HOA, a rare story about dignity, patience, and the quiet courage it takes to stand firm.